Hi everyone, this is the first video that we're going to be doing just to revise English Language Paper 1 for AQA. Now we're going to go through all of the 5 key questions in a series of lessons. This is the first one and we're starting off with our biggest one, our question 5. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just to test your understanding of what you can remember for Paper 1. For a lot of us it has been a long time since we went through anything with Paper 1. So all I want you to do is have a look at these statements and try and identify which ones are false and which ones are true. So for number 1 then, Paper 1, question 3 is all about structure. Question 2, there are 2 sources to read in Paper 1. Question 3, question 4 is worth 16 marks. Number 4, you get marks on SPAG on question 5. Number 5, you get an hour and 45 minutes for the exam unless you have extra time. Number 6, the writing section is worth more than the reading section. Number 7, question 1 requires you to identify explicit information. And number 8, the total marks available for paper 1 and paper 2 combined is 160 marks. Now if you want to pause the video here and go through the statements by yourself, please feel free to do so. Just remember, we're trying to identify which ones are true and which ones are false. If you're not too sure, we're going to go through the answers in a moment. Okay? Class feedback. Check your answers against the ones below. So as you can see there, on the left hand side we have our true statements and the false statements on the right. So for the first one then, paper 1 question 3 is all about structure. It's absolutely true. That is the whole extent of the question. It's just going to focus on structure. So if you don't know your structural techniques, it's really important that you learn those for question 3. Again, we will be doing a video specifically on question 3 in a week or so. The next one, you get marks on SPAG on question 5. So 16 marks just for your spelling, punctuation and grammar. Next, you get an hour 45 for the exam unless you have extra time. Next, we have question 1 requires you to identify explicit information. So if you're not sure what we mean by this, this is where you identify obvious pieces of information, normally from the first 5-ish lines of the text. Next, we have the total marks available for paper 1 and paper 2 combined is 160 marks. So there's absolutely loads of marks available. You only need roughly 70 to somewhere to 75 potentially to get a 4 in the exam. So our false statements then. There are 2 sources to read in paper 1. That is false. There's only one text to read in paper 1. That's often why a lot of us find it a bit easier. It's paper 2 that there's 2 texts to read. Next we have question 4 is worth 16 marks. That's false. Again, that is paper 2. On paper 1, question 4 is worth 20 marks. Next we have the writing section is worth more than the reading section. This is false. There's 40 marks for reading and 40 marks for writing. However, it is important to note that the writing section only makes up one question. That one question, the creative writing question, is worth half of the marks on the exam paper. So before we move on then, I'd like to think about our stretch and challenge task at the top there. How do you revise for English? Because a lot of people do struggle with this one. If you're not too sure, get in touch. If you've got anything else that you want to find out about, any other advice or anything like that, I can definitely point you in the right direction for some more things to help you to revise. So by the end of this video, we're going to be able to recall the questions for English Language Paper 1. You're going to understand where to apply your focus as the exam approaches. So as the date of this video, we're about 2 weeks away from the first exam in English language. And finally, you're going to apply your understanding to revise for the actual exam. So the first thing you need to be able to do is make sure you know every single question on the exam paper. So let's go through these now very quickly. So you can see there we have our questions, we have the skills needed and the marks available for each one. So for question 1, this is where we identify explicit information and that is worth 4 marks. Question 2, this is where we identify and comment on language and that's worth 8 marks. Question 3 is your structure question. Again, it's worth 8 marks. And then question 4 It's that one that a lot of people really do struggle with. It's the agree or disagree evaluation question, and that is worth a massive 20 marks. And then you have your question 5, which is creative writing, and it's broken down with 24 marks for content and 16 marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar. So as we are approaching the exams, we will go through all of these questions in due time. I want to stress the importance of going through the final 2 questions, question 4 and question 5, because combined that is 60 marks, which is a massive portion of your actual exam paper. So if you're going to do anything, just make sure that you feel confident about these 2 questions, and please do make sure that in the exam that you definitely don't skip them, or any of the questions for that matter. Here's our teacher's top tip as well before we move on. I want you to consider how much time to spend on each question in relation to their value. So for example, everyone can do a good language response if you're given half an hour for it, but it's only worth 8 marks. So try and think, how much time should you really be spending on that if it's only worth quite a small amount compared to question 4 or question 5. Look at the exam question and attempt the challenges that follow. So this is the image that we're going to use for our creative writing. You may have come across it before, and it's a very typical kind of image that you might get within the exam. And this is the kind of statement that you might be faced with. So it says a magazine has asked for contributions for their creative writing section. Either write a description of a library as suggested by this picture, or write a story about discovering a hidden object. You get 24 marks for content and organisation, 16 marks for technical accuracy, and for a total of 40 marks. So what I'd like to think about first of all before we move on is, how confident do you feel about creative writing? This is a massive portion of the exam paper, so if you are a little bit unsure about it, we definitely need to make sure that you're spending some time focusing on this question and making sure we can boost your confidence before the exam. For the super challenge, I want you to kind of think about what kind of techniques or methods could you use to create a successful response. And then finally, I want you to think about, what are the examiners looking for? Have you actually familiarised yourself with the mark scheme? If you're not too sure, we will go through it now. Now we're going to take a look at the mark scheme. So I will just say first of all that this isn't the top level. The top amount of marks is 24. When this says lower level 4, the top band you can get into is an upper level 4. So this doesn't mean the same as a grade 4. If you were to get 19 to 21, you get a very good mark indeed, somewhere around a 7 or something like that. So if we actually look at what the mark scheme is asking us, then we're just going to break down actually what they're talking about. So for the first bullet point, it says communication is convincing. So does it make sense, and does it actually match to the image? The next one, tone, style and register are convincingly matched to purpose and audience. So have you actually looked at the image, and have you matched the same kind of tone that is implied by the picture that you have? So if it is set in a library, it should meet that same kind of tone that we've all experienced when you've went into that kind of place. Next we have a really important one. You have extensive vocabulary with conscious crafting of linguistic devices. Now that sounds nice and posh, however all it really means is that we're using high-level vocabulary a lot. When we say extensive, we mean using that vocabulary quite often. Then you've got conscious crafting of linguistic devices. So essentially what we mean here is that you're using your language techniques, but you're avoiding the obvious cliches. So you're actually trying to think about unique or different language devices that you can use. So rather than just using your basic simile, saying something like the man was as slow as a snail, try to think about a more unique way to actually phrase it, or make it a little bit more interesting. So avoid some of the basic obvious similes, metaphors and personification, and try and do something that's going to grab the examiner's attention. Next we have varied and effective structure features. So the same kind of structural techniques that you've done in question 3 should now apply to your own creative writing. Writing is highly engaging with a range of complex ideas. So is it actually interesting? Have you used the techniques that can actually keep the reader engaged with what you're producing? Next we have constantly coherent use of paragraphs with integrated discourse markers. Now some people, for whatever reason, tend to forget to include paragraphs in their writing. Now if you don't paragraph your writing, you're not going to get any more than a lower level 2, so it's important that you have the paragraphs in there. When we're talking about integrating them with discourse markers, we mean, does your writing flow? Do all the paragraphs go into one another, and do they work together to help us to understand what you're trying to communicate in your response? Next, we're going to look at the 16 marker. So specifically, we're going to look at level 3, which is 9 to 12. So this is a good area for us to aim at as well. And let's just break it down and understand where the marks are. So it says sentence demarcation is mostly secure and mostly accurate. So all that means is that you're using the correct punctuation within the correct points within your sentences. Next, we have a range of punctuation is used, mostly with success. Now this is where English gets a bit difficult because we don't know an exact number of the type of punctuation to use. We just know a range means that you're using a lot of the typical kind of punctuation that a lot of us forget to use. I'm talking about colons and semicolons and brackets and things like that. Don't just get stuck in the obvious things of full stops and commas, because that's just not going to get you a high mark. Next we have use a variety of sentence forms for effect. So you've got 3 different types of sentences: simple, compound and complex. Have you used a range of those? Mostly uses standard English appropriately with mostly controlled grammatical structures, so making sure that your grammar is effective. Next we have genuinely accurate spelling. Now this is an important one. If you look at the actual marks, if you were to get 12 out of 16, that would be a fantastic grade, right? And yet it says here that you can still make a few errors, right? Generally accurate spelling means it's not 100% on point. It also says including complex and irregular words. So essentially, if you think about our idea about using extensive vocabulary, if you're also able to use really big words and spell them correctly, it's going to open us up to more marks in the exam as well. And again, increasingly sophisticated use of vocabulary. So thinking about your word choice is massively effective in terms of actually getting a good mark. So think about some of the things we went through, and if you're not sure, do let me know, because we can always go over this kind of stuff again. But those kind of things in a nutshell is what you need to be doing for the English exam for question 5. Look at the example. What mark do you think it would achieve? So we're going to use the mark scheme that we just went through, try and think how successful this response is going to be in the exam. So it says then, the library was shrouded in a blanket of silence, broken only by the occasional whisper of keys being pressed by swift, nimble fingers. There was an electricity in the air that had nothing to do with the storm that was building outside. Everyone within the room worked furiously to complete their final assessment. Locked in, determined, every pair of eyes in the room were trained on the task ahead of them, all except one. Holly stared transfixed at the spot where Tom had sat just 3 weeks before. It couldn't just be a trick of the light. Holly was sure that the vacant seat bore a crimson stain. The colour seemed to have bled into the rough grain of the chair. The stain demanded her attention. It was all she could do not to leap from her chair and run from the room screaming. So she remained, trapped by the image of what had happened to Tom and the constant murmur of fingers upon keyboards. So what I'd like you to do is just think back to the things that we went through in the mark scheme, think about the kind of skills that we've touched upon and the kind of things that would get a successful response, and try and come up in your own mind what kind of mark this would get. Now if you want to give us any feedback, please leave a comment below, and then we can have a nice little discussion about what kind of mark you think this might achieve. Here are some tips now to keep in mind when you're doing your creative writing. So the first one is, creative writing is a process. You can't expect to just bash out something amazing if you're not actually practicing the craft. So a good thing to think about if you are thinking about revising for English, just have a little practice of occasional creative writing. It doesn't need to be a full 5-paragraph response. Just practicing it here and there can really help boost your overall mark. Next, in actual creative writing, there's a theory called the Great Tradition. Now this idea is about learning from other writers. So without reading, you are not learning how writers craft their writing, and therefore you're not allowing your writing to reach its full potential. It's all about copying or mimicking or magpieing some of those techniques and using it in your own writing. Next, you should be aware of what the examiner is looking for. We've just gone through the mark scheme, so again it's good to go and revisit that if you are doing revision. It could be the most interesting story that you actually write, but without demonstrating specific skills, the ones that we went through for example, you won't achieve a high mark in the exam. So this question is worth 50% of the paper, so make sure you spend an appropriate amount of time on it. What you want to do is make sure that you don't do what someone does every single year, is miss out that big question 5 and miss out on all those marks and the potential to pass your exam. Now, if you need any additional support, the new videos will be added every single week. Specifically with these ones, as we're leading up to the exam and we're revising, we're going to have one every 2 days or so. So do check out the other videos as well. If you need any more support, you can leave us a comment below or visit our partner channel, Bookworm Teaching, for more lessons and guidance on all things English. If you've made it this far, guys, thanks ever so much for listening. And if you need any help, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you. Bye bye.